Yeah, it was a pretty good weekend, Brazil. Um, it was a great weekend for Lando Norris, but it was also just a great race in general. Obviously there weren't too much battle for the win, but again for P2, P3, P4, P5, constantly fighting again, and it was similar to Austin, and yeah, just really exciting. I guess the cars coming kind of closer together as the season goes on. And if the championship wasn't so maybe not decided, I don't want to use that word just yet, but like I think we could have had not just three drivers in contention, but a lot more if it was this close all season. But yeah, some people took some great highs this weekend and some people took some great lows. And yeah, I just thought it was a great weekend all in all. It was It was the closest qualifying for in the F1 history in Q3, between the top 10. So yeah, it's shown it all. And I remember when I know what you mean. Like obviously, I was like, "Come on, just cross the line, Lando." And then obviously the Max and Piastri battles going on, with the two Mercedes. I was like, "Oh!" And then was like, "Whoa, where are these all coming from?" Like, obviously, Ollie Behrman was like well on his own, and then Lawson just led them all to the line, and I was like, I did not even clock. It was like that at the bottom, and it was all for points as well. Seventh, eighth, ninth, 10th. All fighting to like dragging it up to the line. So yeah, like you said, it's just exciting that all the cars are this close towards the end of the season. Oh, I can't even think back to it. It was that far ago. But like you said with the Astons, I mean, it was the first time since Shanghai that Stroll had got into SQ3. So it shows that the cars there and there about. And I think that's a good position for Aston Martin to be in, going into obviously next year with Adrian Newey's more he's gonna have more impact on the car and more of an influence as well, but all in all, did it transpire into the races? I don't think so, but yeah, all in all, I think that's where I thought everyone was going to end up in sprint qualifying, with the two McLarens maybe up there, but Kimi Antonelli was a shock for me. Had a great weekend, and I'm sure we're going to talk about him more. But yeah, I think Oscar probably thought going into the sprint that he'd probably get Kimi, and then it's just him versus Lando, and Kimi put up a great fight, and it ended up being more a Lando versus Kimi fight in the sprint. I mean, first of all, I don't think Norris is smart enough to make that move, and also it's just as much as a risk for him. If you actually watch Kimmy's onboard, he does have a little slide, but as he goes through that corner but keeps going. I think the Martin Brundle actually spoke about the difference between their throttles, and Oscar's kind of went off while going over the curb where Lando sent it full. And maybe that could have been the difference. But yeah, obviously, bit of water onto the track. I mean, it looks all right for Oscar in a way because it's not like, oh, he's gone and flopped it. Everyone's carried on the drivers have in the same corner in the same lap have also spinned out, and we're very lucky not to go into each other. I don't think it was particularly. Uh, I think it was just really unlucky, to be honest, for Oscar. I don't think it was a particular, loss of concentration from him. Maybe should have been more careful knowing the conditions because obviously, yeah, we can say two other drivers went out in that corner, but his teammate didn't, Kimi Antonelli didn't, Max Verstappen didn't, George Russell didn't, the Ferraris didn't. So it's like, well, if you want to be held to the standard of more them drivers rather than Franco Colapinto, I know who I would rather be compared to. So, yeah, it is a bit of a um, probably just got him in the wrong mentality for the rest of the weekend from there. And it was just unfortunate to be honest, but that's racing.
Yeah, I think that it's just one of those where it could have happened to anyone. It didn't happen to anyone, and it's one of those where I think just because of how Piastri is at the moment, that's why it happened to him in a sense. And yeah, it's a difficult one, but yeah, I'm sure that I think he was able to move on from it somewhat for the rest of the weekend. As you said, though, I do think it set him up. I don't think after that you never thought he was ever going to challenge for the win in any sense. Um, and I think that he was then probably a little bit more. He wasn't more safe because obviously, as we'll get onto the race, obviously that incident into turn one. But I think it was obviously it just takes a little bit out of you, and that you know that you can't afford you can't afford to DNF again. If he DNFs in the race, that is, you know, not the championship over, but it basically is. Whereas, he probably then gets into a little bit of the mindset of, I just need to get some points on the board for this weekend. So, yeah, it was a difficult one for him. And yeah, as I said, a bit of a misery compiler just happening to him at the worst time possible. But yeah, obviously, other than that, Norris comfortably winning ahead of Kimi Antonelli, who did really well. Obviously, to hold on to P2, ahead of George Russell in P3. Obviously, Aston Martin were able to get a couple of points on the board as well, with Alonso finishing P6 and Pierre Gasly finishing P8 in the sprint, getting Alpine's first point since before the summer break. So, yeah, very good for Pierre there. And overall, it was a decent sprint. Moving on to the Saturday afternoon, and of course, with qualifying. Um, from uh, qualifying. I mean, what did you make of that? I mean, that was a big shock. But I don't think it was ever really in contention for pole, I think. So, yeah, I mean, obviously, as a Lando Norris fan, how excited were you when you saw that Max Verstappen was qualifying in P16?
Well, to be honest, Deb, I was actually getting like war flashbacks to last year. And I was like, you know what? Brazil and Max, they are just not, they shouldn't be, reckoned with. They're a force that shouldn't be reckoned with. And, I kind of knew that Max was always going to come up through the field, but it was shocking. I mean, the first Q1 exit for Max Verstappen based off pure pace since Sochi 2021. Which obviously we know what happened there. Lando Norris took his first pole. So I knew as soon as Max went out, it was only ever going to be, wait, it was only ever going to be Lando's to win. So yeah, I just knew. But yeah, it didn't look the first time where I kind of, you know, it was quite good for Yuki because They both went out in Q1, and it's shown that you know there is something wrong with the car, and it's not just Yuki who's struggling with it. I mean, Max, if Verstappen can't put a lap together even with that car, then it clearly must be extremely bad. But I always knew, no matter where Max finished in that race, but finished in qualifying, I knew he'd go through the grid, and would be on for a podium, if not the win, which would have been insane for the win. But yeah, I think Max might be too far back for the championship. However, due to like obviously where he qualified and taking, a new power unit, I think he is going to be fast these next few, last few races, and maybe it's like a slight blessing in disguise. I mean, I don't know what his bonuses are, but if he could get second in the championship with the wider context of how dominant the McLaren's car has been, I mean, surely he's owed a couple of £100 for that. I think it'll be insane, and definitely maybe this quali in Brazil is a blessing in disguise for, I guess, the changes on the car to happen.
Yeah, no, I agree with that actually, and you maybe when you said that, it made me start thinking about potentially a little bit like Lewis Hamilton in the back end of 2021. Well, obviously he took a new engine, and that was actually obviously in Brazil he was starting from the back, and went up to win that race, and then from then on he was just absolutely on a charge, and ultimately on pace. Should have won the championship because of those last few races of the season. And I mean, it is too far back. I think Max to do something and be that, Max can't just win every race now and win a championship. That has gone, and it's not in his hands anymore. So I still don't think he's quite going to be in it, because it will take Lando Norris to have an absolute stinker now, and completely bottle it. Which maybe you're thinking a year or two ago. I'm thinking, okay, there's still an opportunity for that. I think from what we've seen from Lando in the past few races, I just can't see that anymore. And I'm sure we'll get onto it in a bit more detail later. But yeah, for me, Lando, this is... I'm almost tempted to say it's as good as done. Which, look, I know you obviously won't like that, but yeah, I'm tempted to say that. But anyway, on to the rest of qualifying. And that man, Lando Norris, was on pole position, quite comfortable in the end. And I don't think anyone ever really thought he wasn't going to be on pole, especially with Piastri not really being in the fight. And, Antonelli and Leclerc just not really having the car underneath them, I don't think, to properly challenge. But yeah, Norris obviously on pole, very comfortable, and very good result for him. Antonelli once again proving to be best of the rest. P2, as he was in sprint qualifying, as he was in the sprint. Yeah, really, really solid from him once again. Leclerc, I think a little bit of a masterclass there from him. I think very under the radar, really good performance to get P3 there. Especially when you saw how Hamilton was, and yeah, especially how difficult that Ferrari seems to have been this weekend. P3 in qualifying, I think that's really, really good result. And then Piastri P4, not terrible, not terrible. I think a good bounce back from the sprint. I'll be honest. I don't think there's a huge amount more he could have done when you take into account that sprint. So yeah, not too bad, and it kept him in contention for a podium, P2. And then I think the big talking point I'd say is those behind him from P5 to P8, Hadjar, Lawson, Behrman, all very good qualifying from them. Obviously great for RB. I would say though, Oliver Behrman, will he be a bit disappointed with that? Because when you're looking at Q2 and then you're looking early on in Q3, you're thinking that could have been top 5. And I think they kept saying on commentary he'll be disappointed if he's not in the top 5. Do you think he'll be a little bit disappointed looking back? Maybe he could have got more out of that?
I mean, absolutely. I mean, it was him and Kimmy who were running the sessions, obviously. Lando's Q1 time would have been enough to get him pole. So that shows the comfortableness of him getting pole. But yeah, like you said, absolutely. Behrman was in contention. We don't really know what happened. I think, did he have less fresh tyres? He only had one run on fresh tyres. So obviously only one shot to get a quick lap in. So there's that to play into it. But like he said in the race, I know this is qualifying, but he said that P6 to him now feels normal. And that's crazy, especially after last weekend for him, is where he got his P4. That was amazing, such a high. And now P6, it's a bit like, oh, maybe we're better. Like we could be even higher than that, which is kind of insane. But yeah, I think maybe the quality could have been slightly better, but he's still amazing in a Haas when Ocon isn't even in Q3. So, he's a much more experienced teammate. I think he's got nothing to worry about. And to be honest, the Racing Bulls always looked quite strong in Interlagos this weekend. So I think they looked the better car to the Red Bull prior to the race. So yeah, it was always I think they were gonna out qualify Behrman.
And talking of that Behrman Ocon situation, I mean, what do you make of it from Ocon's point of view? Obviously, at the early part of the season, he was very much the senior driver in the side, and he was the one getting all the points. Obviously, think back to that P5, I think it was in China, and it seemed like, okay, this is the dynamic that maybe the team wanted, having a more experienced race-winning team leader in Ocon, someone who's going to be there to get those big points pulls, and then someone who can learn off him from, obviously Ollie Behrman, a young, exciting talent who's maybe going to be a bit more raw, maybe at times have some really great performances, but be a little bit less consistent. That just hasn't been the case at all, especially since really the summer break, and maybe even a little bit before that. Oliver Behrman is proving to be, I mean, that's where all the hopes of the teams are basically being rested on. What is going on with Esteban Ocon? Is it a lack of motivation, or is it just he's just not as good as Ollie?
I mean, Ollie Behrman's someone who I've always rated so highly. I mean, him and Kimi had similar journeys getting into F1 where obviously they were teammates in F2. Didn't actually finish that high up. It was, compared to obviously Hadjar and Bortoletto, you've seen them fighting for the championship and now they're here fighting on a great level themselves as well. But they had similar, journeys into F1 and in such big academies of Mercedes and Ferrari. And I think for Ollie, he's 19 years old. He has nothing to lose with how he's racing. There's nothing really big to play for in the championship for them. And there's a few rumours going about that he will be his Lewis Hamilton's successor from either 2026 or 2027. God knows what's going to happen to Lewis Hamilton there at Ferrari, but I think that's highly likely if he keeps performing in this manner. And when we look at Ocon's career, in contrast to that, where could you see him going when it comes to a better team? Um,
Mm,
and you can't. I mean, Ollie's got all his future ahead of him, and it feels like maybe for Ocon, it's all behind him. Um, so yeah, maybe it is a lack of motivation. God knows if there's something going on with the car. He's not spoken about it. That he's just clearly Ollie's taken to it a bit more, and maybe this is just going to be a trend where teams have given up on progressing the car for obviously the rest of the season now, and we're seeing rookies catch up with their much more experienced teammates. For example, Kimi Antonelli this weekend and George Russell. Kimi well outperformed George in the car. And maybe that's just the vibe that we're going to have until the end of the season, and it could be a lot to do with that. Not too much data being shared about. And yeah, I think the rookies can just go out and perform as best as they can, with limited data, and it's clearly working in their favour. So yeah, I think it's more so not a lack of what Ocon has, but more so the assets of Ollie. That's actually the difference between the two teammates at the minute.
yeah, it is a very strange one because I think you look back at Ocon and his stock fluctuates so much. You think back to obviously when he came into the sport, when he was at Force India, and he had one of the great rookie seasons. Not quite a rookie season, but similar ilk to how Behrman's is. And he had a brilliant season, consistently up in there in the top 6, top 7. And then obviously his Renault partnership with Ricardo, and it just was not good at all. But then Ricardo left, and he was alongside Alonso, and he sort of became that, on par almost with Alonso, and people sort of then viewed him as, okay, he's a really good driver. And then his time with Pierre, and there were definitely highs, there were definitely lows. You think of that Monaco P3. I mean, that's still, I mean, he got that on pure pace, on pure merit, and that's, I think, that wasn't that long ago. And yeah, obviously the P2 in Brazil last year, that was on pure pace as well. Obviously qualified P4, could have won that race, I think, arguably. And the start of this year, he was, yeah, great. P5 in China and other consistent point scoring results. But he almost, it feels like he does have an inconsistency about him. I just don't. I have no idea what is next for Ocon, because obviously, I'm not saying he's going to leave the team at the end of this year or anything like that. But as you said, where would he go? Because it almost feels like he's gone to the. I'm not saying Haas are the bottom of the grid anymore, but they are the smallest team in F1, and you know you would naturally be looking, if you're Esteban Ocon and he was putting in brilliant performances every week, he'd be looking at a different team. I don't think there's really another team that he could go to after Haas if he doesn't make it a Haas. Has there ever been a driver that's not made it a Haas that's moved on to a different team? No, is the answer. You think at Roman Grosjean, after he obviously had that incident in Bahrain, but then you think back to Magnussen last year, or Schumacher.
Schumacher.
No, none of them have gone on to then be picked up by another team after not doing so well at Haas. So, yeah, I think it's worrying times for Esteban. I think he does need to step it up. Obviously, I think he'll be looking at next year as that's the opportunity to maybe start on a clean slate, and maybe he'll adapt to that new regulation car better, and maybe somehow it could suit him as a driver incredibly well. I'm sure loads of drivers will be looking at it and thinking, well, that's an opportunity. So, yeah, it's a weird one, but if I was an Ocon fan, I'd definitely be a little bit worried right now. So, yeah, I feel like it's going a bit overlooked as well. I feel like people aren't really talking about Ocon's struggles at the moment. But anyway, you can't take anything away from Behrman. Brilliant once again. And obviously in the race, a brilliant result for him. And we'll move on to the race now. And obviously the podium was, of course, Norris P1, comfortable by 10 seconds. Kimi Antonelli P2 and Verstappen P3. And yeah, I think the big talking point. There's a couple of big talking points. Obviously, that turn one incident after the safety car restart with Piastri, Kimi, and Leclerc, which led to Charles Leclerc's DNF and a 10-second penalty for Piastri. And also Max Verstappen, as we said before, going from the pit lane to the podium. A brilliant performance from him, but what could have been potentially. We'll get onto that. First of all, we'll talk about that turn one incident, though, with Piastri, Kimi, and Leclerc. Obviously, Piastri getting a great launch after the safety car restart, going up on the inside, going 3 wide into the corner, and yeah, just Kimi sort of closed the door on him. They made contact, and Kimi went flying into Leclerc, and Leclerc obviously broke his suspension, I think it was, and was out of the race. Who do you think was at fault for that? Because obviously Piastri was the one that got the 10-second penalty, but a lot of drivers have come out afterwards and said that I think that's more maybe on Kimi. What did you make of it? Who do you think was at fault for that?
Yeah, I mean, even Charles himself came out and said, I'm not saying Oscar wasn't in the right, but I think Kimi was more so in the wrong. Um, at the time of it happening, I was a bit more, okay, Oscar, 10-second penalty, yeah. But looking back now, I still believe the 10-second penalty was correct, but I do sympathise with Oscar in the situation because, say Kimi didn't give him really that space. Obviously, poor Charles was out wide, giving them two as much space as possible, and still ended up out. And yeah, it was just really unlucky for Charles. But yeah, I think Kimi, he said in his interview after the race that he actually didn't see Oscar in the mirrors, and that's why he didn't give him that space. But the rules are, Oscar can't just disappear. However, he lost control of the car, and it was ambitious. It was definitely ambitious to go and shoot it down the inside. Um, all three going into a corner as well. It's kind of similar to maybe if we look at Kota situation where he took out his teammate as well. But what was it? We're in Brazil. A famous saying: "If you're a racing driver and you don't go for the gap, then you're no longer a racing driver." It's absolutely true. He's fighting for his championship here, and if he didn't go for it, he was the one losing out ultimately at the end of the day, and it was his opportunity for him to go second and maybe even a safety car to happen. And yes, he would have served his penalty, but under a safety car, you never know what would have happened. And I don't know. I can't really say it without the biasness, but like I'm glad Oscar did it. Obviously, I'm glad because he ended up, getting the penalty for it. And in hindsight, nothing really helped him in regards to safety cars or red flags. But I think people, that's what you want to see from Oscar. He is losing out now. He has nothing to lose though. And if he hadn't have gone for it, I think we probably wouldn't have had the respect for him that we do. I know he ended up, maybe Charles Leclerc fans might not enjoy it or have the respect for him. But as a McLaren fan, that's what you want to see from your team's drivers, is constantly going for the moves that could make the difference to his championship and his whole career. So yeah, I'm glad he went for it, but I'm also kind of glad he went for it as the Lando fan did.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. I think it is thrilling to see someone like just absolutely go for it and have nothing to lose, and that definitely was what it felt like watching him just charge into turn one, going down the inside of two drivers. I think it's difficult to say whether he was at fault. Like you, when I watched it at the start, I was like, oh yeah, that's what's he doing like, but. And I do still think he was at fault for it, because at the set, obviously Leclerc was saying that, well, if a driver's on the inside of you, he gains the right to that space, and Kimi did close the door on him. But at the same time, I do still think, well, there were two drivers already going into that corner, battling. You don't have to throw yourself into that, and I know it. That as I said, if there's a gap and you don't go for it, you're not a racing driver. But I respect him for doing it, and I do think it was actually almost the right thing to do, because he almost does have nothing to lose at this point. But I'd still say he was slightly. I do think Kimi was a little bit naive to just close the door like that, a little bit aggressive. But I think it's difficult to. I still maybe think that potentially a racing incident could have been the correct decision there, which would have been a bit unfair on Charles because of the outcome. But yeah, it's a difficult one. I think it's just a tough one for the stewards, isn't it?
Yeah, I think the rules are if you lose control of the car, which Oscar did because he locked up, that's the rule. He lost control of the car during that, and that should be something towards it. And also, if we want to look at the rules of, you know, someone hitting the apex, that's something that has been kind of for the last few races has been something the stewards have been quite vocal about, is who's ahead at the apex. It weren't Oscar. It was very close, but it weren't Oscar. It was Kimi. So if you look at it and interpret it that way, Kimi had every right to do turning in on that corner because it was his. And yeah, if Oscar hadn't gone for it though, yeah, I would have probably looked at him differently. So I'm glad he went for it. But by the handbook, the rules, I think ultimately it was his 10-second penalty have, and I think it would have been extremely harsh if they even gave Kimi a 5-second penalty. I don't think that would have been fair, but I don't think Kimi's completely in the right, but I don't think he's enough in the wrong to have had a penalty himself.
Yeah, no, I think I would agree with that actually. Yeah, I think it's. I think ultimately they did eventually come to the right decision. But yeah, I mean ultimately they didn't completely ruin Piastri's race. He was able to be in the fight. Obviously, he finished P5 in the end. Wasn't able to get past George Russell at the end of the race, but yeah, I mean it's a somewhat decent recovery drive. I think he maybe could have, if he was the Oscar Piastri from 3 or 4 or 5 races ago, then he might have probably been able to charge through a little bit more, I think. But yeah, it keeps him somewhat in contention for the Drivers' Championship. Obviously, 24 points off Lando Norris now, which is almost a race win. And with 3 rounds left, I mean, you were saying before we went on air, uh, Lando Norris could wrap it up by Qatar now. And I think let's talk about that championship. I mean, obviously you're a big Lando fan, and I know you won't want to jinx it or get too ahead of yourself or anything, but surely, even you are thinking right now, it is his to lose.
Oh, I'm so giddy about it, but I can't be. I think as well, you know, with when it comes, you would probably think that this is the best F1 I'm ever watched, and it's so great when races come around. No, I can't wait for the season to be over. I can't wait for it to all be done, and just get into next season, because I sit there with my hands crossed, my fingers crossed, my legs crossed, and I'm not even watching it because of like what could happen. Even going into next race, yeah, that's great. Lando is 24 points ahead. That is brilliant. But what happens if he goes and does what Piastri did in the sprint? It's Las Vegas. He actually, he was ended up going to. Did he end up going to hospital in Las Vegas? He had a very high impact crash two
Yeah,
years ago.
yeah, I think so.
So like, I do I think because he crashed there 2 years ago, it'll happen again? No, but we did speak about, as soon as Lando is the leader of this championship, is the pressure then going to be on him, and then we're going to see a comeback from Piastri? Who knows? I mean, he was, you could say, yeah, he was ahead going into Brazil, and look at the weekend he had, but he was ahead by 1 point. So anything could literally happen in Formula One. Lando goes out and Oscar wins. I don't think I could see that in Las Vegas, but that could happen. And again, Oscar's then leading by 1 point, and it's all to play for. So, and he's got the momentum going into the final two races. So, yeah, I don't want to say anything that would jinx it, but Lando Norris is driving like a world champion right now. And if anyone had any doubt that he was world drivers champion quality, I think he's proven it right now. Um, and yeah, it's exciting. It is exciting, but I don't want to get ahead of myself. What do
Yeah,
you think, though, Seb?
I I can't see any result now other than Lando Norris being world champion. And I think as long as he doesn't DNF in the next 3 races, I think he's the world champion. And I think mainly, obviously, the incredible form he's picked up in the last few races is part of that. But also, I think just the lack of competition now, and the fact he's almost destroyed that competition, it has made me think I can't see anyone else winning it now, and because I can't see Oscar winning it, and even though it's only 24 points and he is next best placed to win that championship, I just don't think he has it in him at this stage of his career right now to do it. And I've backed Oscar the whole way basically this season, but now I just, yeah, I've got to admit I can't see it. He's bottling it, and he has bottled it. And yes, there is potentially a world where Lando Norris could get in his own head right now and almost either become complacent and think he has it already under control, or becomes too tentative and doesn't quite push because he knows he does have that mindset of, if I don't DNF, I basically win the championship, and then just doesn't get that raw speed. Yes, these are all things that could happen, but just the way he's handled the last few weekends, he is a different driver to the one we saw when he was Lando no wins. He has the mental side of his driving, which was such a massive talking point going into the start of this season, going quite a long way into this season. And think back to last year before he had his win at Miami, like that was such a big talking point when it came to Lando Norris. That does he actually have it in him mentally? Does he overthink? He has proven all of that wrong, and he is just driving off of his pure ability at the moment. And I can't see that changing. If he'd had a couple of survives, you think back to, I think, what was it last year, Singapore, where yes, he won the race comfortably, but you saw a little bit of a slip up in him. You saw a little bit of a potential that he could have lost that race. You're not seeing any of that from him right now. He
Mhm.
is just he's Max Verstappen-esque at the moment, and yeah, I think I can't see Oscar winning it. Obviously, the only other driver that I could see winning it would be Max. I don't know what's happened, but
I can hear you now. I can hear you now.
um,
Um,
yeah,
no,
as I was
no,
saying, I think that Max is the only other driver now I could see winning it. And I can't see him winning. He's too far back. He's 49 points back, and that is just too far for anyone to win the championship with 3 rounds to go. He needs
Max
Lando
Verstappen though, innit?
to DNF twice,
Yeah, I mean,
realistically.
that's one thing that you said before. Like, something I do want to say on Piastri is there's a few things. Piastri's reminded me. I mean, let's just talk about Zandvoort. Zandvoort happened. If Zandvoort hadn't happened, Lando wins championship 100%, no doubt in my mind. That's 18 points lost, but it happened, and that's what happens in a championship sometimes. Stuff happens. Um, he was 34 points behind, okay? It took him that long to be able to, get them points back and also gain a 22-point lead. In that time, Oscar Piastri hasn't been on the podium, so it has been poor from Oscar. I don't know what's up with him, but what has and I think it'd be interesting, he doesn't talk in interviews so much so about, oh, I'm really struggling with the car, but he's talking about how he feels different in it, but he's not particularly saying he's struggling. So I do think it is a personal mentality thing. One thing in the race I will say, if it was Lando Norris who had that crash, McLaren not really standing up for him, Andrea Stella kind of saying, oh, I'll review it later. Well, no, in the race, I seen someone say Christian Horner would have 100% had Max Verstappen's back when he was fighting for a World Drivers' Championship, even if he believed he was in the wrong. I think McLaren should have backed him a bit more there, but like myself, I do believe that was a penalty, and maybe that's their sportsmanship, papaya rules and all that. But Oscar Piastri has reminded me that he is human. I did regard, and this is why I was so nervous this whole season, but I regarded Oscar Piastri as someone like another animal. I almost regarded him like I thought he was going to be like a Max Verstappen or a Lewis Hamilton, and I don't think he is that caliber of driver. I think he's sensational, and I think he needs this experience like Lando Norris did last year with Max Verstappen to experience what it's like with the pressure of fighting for a championship. And next year, I could see him going on to win it if McLaren have the car, even beating Lando Norris. But at the end of the day, we've got to remember he's 23 years old, and I just don't believe he is in the same category as it as Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton are. And people might think, well, obviously, yeah, because he has not won a championship. But I think Oscar is regarded so highly, and I think people would have regarded him as highly as them to beat Lando Norris. And yeah, I just think Oscar, he's washed. No, I'm joking. But no, I just he's reminded me he is human. He's 23 years old, and it's his first time going for a championship. If he's going to slip up, I think anyone would in that circumstance, and I think it's going to be his to win next year. But he's needed to be humbled, and I think that's exactly what's happened.
Yeah, no, I think that it's such an interesting dynamic with Oscar. It is about, for me, how he bounces back from this next year, because like I could definitely see him being in the fight for it next year if McLaren are up there, but it is all about how he bounces back from this. And as you said, reminding people that he's human, reminding everyone that he's human and that he isn't on that same level as a Max or a Lewis, I think is true, because the all everything that was around Oscar was that he it just doesn't affect him mentally. Like, and that was always the story. The whole season was Lando maybe has sometimes a little bit more pace and does have maybe ultimately a little bit more speed than Oscar, but he gets everything gets to his head, and he can't quite put it together. He's not quite as consistent maybe as Oscar, who maybe doesn't have quite the ultimate pace or quite that raw pace. He's still obviously incredibly quick, but he just puts it together when he needs to, and he doesn't get phased by anything. that's it couldn't be further from the truth, and that's what we've seen in the past few weeks. And yeah, it's interesting to see because it does make you think what ultimately is Oscar's pure like unique ability in that sense. Like, why is he this super hyped and talked about driver that's considered to be the next big thing in a sense? Obviously, not like in the sense of Kimi Antonelli, like next big thing, but like the current next big thing. And that he's that almost person that could be like a Max Verstappen and just goes on to win like a machine. Well, if he can't quite cut it mentally, and he isn't a machine, which we've seen factually he isn't a machine, and maybe he could get back into that and become that. But if he isn't, and he doesn't quite sometimes have the raw pace of Lando, I mean, this is very reactionary, and I understand that, but I mean, is he ever really gonna be good enough to win a championship? And that is incredibly reactionary to say, but is he? You know, I maybe thought earlier in the season at points like, oh, maybe if he was alongside Max Verstappen, he'd give him a good run for his money, sort of thing. Like even if they're in the same team, I'm not thinking that at all right now. I'm not. I'm thinking that he is not at all at the same caliber of driver as Max Verstappen. And if you're not at that level, you're not this special talent, really. No, I think that is very reactionary, and of course he could completely prove that wrong because obviously he could bounce back from this. And you think maybe back to Lewis Hamilton in his first couple of years, obviously at the back end of 2007, it's sort of it was obviously you think back to China and Brazil, and it's sort of he didn't bottle it, but because other things happened to him that sort of lost the championship for him. But at the same time, he collapsed at the end of the season, and he nearly did in 2008. You think obviously back to Brazil, final race of the year in 2008, he nearly completely bottled that, right? He nearly did. So, and yet he came back and eventually was the driver that we all knew from the Mercedes era. And so I'm sure there is Piastri could come back and do that, and he could become this. He could still be that robot driver if he gets over this and bounces back from it. But if he doesn't, I think then there's huge question marks over his head, and that isn't. As I said, it is maybe quite reactionary to say that, but it's. I think it's definitely a question mark hanging over him after this. Which I mean, yeah, a few races ago, I was not thinking. So I think what was it, 2 races ago, I was backing him to just bounce back and be like, yeah, we'll win the championship. No worries, no worries.
In Kota, you said no matter what happens this weekend, I believe Oscar Piastri will still go on to win the championship.
Basically, yeah. What do I
keep
know?
going with that narrative, Seb. Stop questioning him. He's still your winner.
So now I've completely gone the other way and say, is he even actually that good at all? No, he's going to come back and he's going to win the last 3 races.
But that's the thing is what I want to say is, you mentioned how for Max it's out of his hands. He could win all the rest of the races and still, still wouldn't win. And, would have to depend on the likes of Oscar and Lando doing terribly. But that's the same for Oscar now. He could win every race. The last 3, Las Vegas, Qatar, the Qatar Sprint, and Abu Dhabi. And if Lando Norris comes second to him, Lando would still win the championship, which is worrying because even if Oscar does his absolute utmost, does an incredible drive, as long as Lando comes second to him, it's still his, which would be insane. But considering, it shows the consistency of Lando Norris because Oscar having extra 3 wins that he's already got, and Lando still wins championship with less wins. It's like, how's that happened? But it's because even when Lando Norris hasn't won, he's been on that podium. What is it now? 16, 17 times? I think it's 17 after this weekend, which is insane. And that goes to show why, you don't need to win every race to be world champion, and consistency does matter. So, I think that's the bad news. Obviously, it's bad news that he's 24 points behind his teammate, but he's not in control anymore in the slightest. And even if he does a generational drive, wins every race by 30 seconds, still not enough if Lando Norris is coming second to him. So he has to prey on the downfall of his teammate,
Yeah.
and I am not. So thank you.
I mean, this is maybe a bit of a controversial thing, but if you were Oscar, and this has been something that's been a situation many times before in F1, would you ever try? And I think it's different for us because I would just say yes to this question. But would you ever try and potentially take out your teammate?
Um, if I was Oscar, no, I wouldn't do that. No, if there was an opportunity that arose to me where I could knock him out and obviously keep myself in this race, yeah, absolutely. It'd be stupid if he wouldn't take that. Would that cause consequences for potentially the rest of the season? Let's say he did it in Vegas and then Qatar comes around and Abu Dhabi. And then even next season, if that was to
Mm.
happen, that it was intentional, you know what McLaren's like, bloody hell for papaya
I
rules.
think you'd have to leave the team, to be honest.
Yeah, you're sacked on the spot, points taken off, yeah. But like, yeah, if he could get away with it, absolutely. But no one wants to win in that. Like,
Do
I
they?
would
Do
say
they
no one
not
wants.
though?
But then you've got a Max Verstappen who I think if he was up against his teammate, he absolutely would
Mm.
do that, and that's the sort of driver he was. But Oscar Piastri, could I see him do that? Like I was saying, like the papaya rules, if he was to do that and get found out, um, you know, what you get repercussions for, let's say, the last few races. But you don't have to follow that.
Yeah.
Says who?
Yeah.
Yeah, I know they pay you at the end of the day, but you're about to go and win them a World Drivers' Championship and earn them a lot of money for that. So yeah, and also I love Lando, and I think he's going to be the deserving driver to win if he continues on with this momentum. Um, but one thing I will say, and I don't believe this is actually being used to sabotage Oscar, but it will benefit McLaren a lot more if their young British extremely popular driver ends up winning the World Drivers' Championship for just marketing, money, partners. It will be better for them. I don't believe in any world that they're putting that before racing. Um, but yeah, like I said, it'll be more beneficial for them.
Yeah, I think in every aspect, if Lando wins, it is the perfect scenario for McLaren because not only is it the end of this, not the end, but like basically a great end in a sense to a story that he's had with McLaren. And you think about the drive to survive aspect of it. I mean, they're going to absolutely milk the hell out of it, as they should. And that is such a brilliant marketing opportunity for McLaren. But also I think from a driver lineup perspective, in terms of keeping the drivers happy, I think if Oscar had won this year comfortably, say he hadn't had this massive collapse, you're then thinking Lando. I think then Oscar does become the team leader. He does become the number one at the team. And Lando's then thinking, oh, what do I do? Like, I'm never going to truly be the team leader at this team. I'm never going to have the team built around me. And he probably then thinks about the exit door at some point. And it just doesn't, the environment probably isn't as good as having the more experienced, the slightly older driver, the driver who's been at the team a lot longer, him being the driver to win first, and the other driver having to learn from it. I think that is so much more beneficial for McLaren because I think that with Lando winning, Oscar's not going to leave. I don't think, unless he feels like Lando's been massively favoritised, right? He's not going to leave because I think he still knows he has it in him to beat Lando, and I think he knows that this is my first time going for it. I just bide my time, and Lando's not going to leave because he knows that this could be the start of maybe a dynasty. And this is he won it with this team. That's brilliant. That dynamic just stays the same. And even if Oscar wins it next year, I still feel like Lando still feel like he's done what his lifelong dream would be to have done to win the World Drivers' Championship. That pressure's almost gone in a sense, and that he can just almost try and enjoy the rest of his career. And it's not as important as if he's the number one because it's not like going into this year. It's like this is the opportunity of a lifetime, and it might be the only chance he ever gets. I think like if it had been the other way round, it just disrupts the the feeling within the team so much. So yeah, and I don't think the team, obviously, I don't think the team have done anything to prioritize Lando or do anything to that sense. You think about the fact that he got the repercussions or whatever in from Singapore and stuff. I mean, if they were really truly favoriting Lando, I mean, they wouldn't have done that, would they? So yeah, I think that this is the perfect result for the team. But yeah, I think that's all that needs to be said about the championship battle. Apart from maybe Max Verstappen, so we haven't actually really talked about his incredible pit lane to podium finish. But, and we were talking about this before we went on, could it have been the win? Could it have been the first ever pit lane to race win in F1 history if he had stayed out? Obviously, at the time, I think he had, what was it, about 10 seconds or so on Lando with about, 15
I
or so
think it
laps
was
to go?
yeah, no, he had like 15 seconds, but Lando did bring it right down.
So, if you were Max, do you think, on the Red Bull, do you think he should have stayed out? Because obviously Kimi ended up finishing 10 seconds further back from Norris. Do you think he could have more comfortably got P2 if he'd stayed out and potentially won the race? Do you think that was a bit of a blunder from Red Bull?
Yeah, I think absolutely he would have got P2. He could have like even got P1. I mean, do I think Lando probably would have overtook him? Yes, but Max Verstappen would have made it a nightmare for him. He was on soft tires. Lando Norris was only on for he swapped on to them softs. He was only on a 7 lap like new fresher tires than Max because they were used mediums Lando was using. So the actual advantage over Max weren't massive. I mean, um, I look back to Hungary, where Lando did the one stop, ended up winning it over his teammate, even though, Oscar went absolutely like a madman on them last few laps trying to get Lando. Ultimately, he couldn't get past. And I do think Brazil's one of them tracks where, as soon as you're coming down that straight, the DRS just works insanely. And I do think you'll get past, but getting past Max Verstappen is a whole other thing. And I think Max wouldn't have made that extremely hard for Lando, and imagine he ended up taking him out.
Oh, that
Um,
would have been
Kimi
brilliant.
Antonelli, Kimi Antonelli wins his first ever race. Piastri ends up getting the lead back, and it's a lot closer. It would have been insane, but that didn't happen. But like you said, I think Lando would have got past. However, I think he would have been well clear of Kimi, and Kimi was never going to get past Max.
Yeah.
So yeah, P2, exactly 3 more points on to Oscar. Again, I just can't see Max coming back now for this championship unless something absolutely terrible happens to Lando. But to get P2, I think it's quite likely, and it's another 3 point gain on Oscar. So yeah.
Do you think it could have been, and this is criminal thing to say, but if he had stayed out and potentially in a very subtle way taken out Lando, potentially taken out himself out as well, I mean, it would have been a smaller gap to the championship lead, I think. So
Yeah, well, Lando wouldn't have gained 6 points on him, would he? Oh
yeah.
well, it ended up being 9 points in the end. So yeah, it would have been a zero gain for if they both went out there. Obviously, if Max went and took him out and then went on to win it, oh, I would have flown to Brazil and held a meeting myself, to be honest.
Do you think he should have done that? I mean, obviously, look, the team are never going to advocate for that, and he's never going to say that he would actually try and do that. But do you think if he genuinely believed that he was properly in this championship battle, that he might have done something like that? And maybe not even take him out on purpose, because look, that would be ridiculous. That would be Michael Schumacher-esque. But just make it difficult for him and potentially just get under his skin a little bit by making contact or something like that. Do you think that shows that maybe Max and Red Bull don't really think he is properly in this title fight anymore?
Oh,
Or are they
good
just being like a
question,
normal
Seb.
F1 team?
Good question. I mean, there's a lot more to like. I think Lando and Max are really they used to be really good friends, and ever since they've been fighting against each other, I would say their relationship hasn't been as smooth sailing as it used to be, especially towards the end of last year and going into this season. You've not really seen, them friendship that they used to have. So if you look at the what's going to happen if Lando goes and wins it, I do think ultimately if Max could pick who he wanted to win, I think he'd pick Lando. You remember that lovely moment in Las Vegas last year where he said, "Your time will come," in the media pen, and it was lovely to hear Max say that. But Lando is going to be taking his number one car off him. I assume Lando's going to take that number one car. The only really person who hasn't took it's Lewis Hamilton. Um, so that's like obviously, oh, I'm gonna have number one in the front of my car. That's massive. Like that's been Max's whole brand the last 4 years. And so if of course he's gonna want to get under his skin. And I was shocked the first time Lando had to get past Max. He breezed so quickly past Max, and I never thought Max was going to come back and fight him, because he had a lot worse tires than Lando's new soft tires. But I did think he would hold them up a little more, but he just let him pass into the turn one. So I think if it came around to that second time, then we would 100% seen it. And like you said, even though I don't think it's Max's to win, he's going to do everything until the very end to be able to win this championship. And it's still on. It is still on. If this was George Russell, who was this point many points away, I'd go, it's only between Lando and Oscar. But it's Max Verstappen. It's just Max Verstappen.
Yeah.
And I'm not scared of Oscar as much now. I'm still scared of Max probably the most. So yeah, that's where I'm at with it. But yeah, of course, Max isn't going to take it lightly. That someone else is going to win the World Drivers' Championship when he's won it the last 4 years.
Yeah. Um, yeah, no, I agree with that. And then I think the final couple of points from the race, Behrman, obviously, brilliant result for him, P6. We sort of spoke about it a little bit before, but obviously with what was going on with him and Ocon, but yeah, brilliant, converted what was, as we said, a little bit of a disappointing qualifying, which feels weird to say, but yeah, turned it around. Brilliant race pace, really well managed. And as you said before, he was basically in a race of his own towards the end. He was not really going to catch up with the top five, and he was pretty well clear of that train behind him. So yeah, really well managed race from him. Obviously, as you said before as well, a lot of rumours potentially about Ferrari and that now starting to spin around. So be interesting one to keep an eye on, Ollie Behrman. But exciting times for Haas there. And then RB, interestingly, Liam Lawson ended up finishing ahead of Isaac Hadjar, despite Isaac Hadjar qualifying ahead. Isaac Hadjar was pretty disappointed with his result, obviously qualifying P5, finishing P8. He was pretty disappointed by that. We saw it quite a couple of times in the race where he's actually it was stuck behind Stroll, wasn't he? And he was like bashing his steering wheel because of how disappointed he was that he couldn't get past him quicker. I think that was really what cost him. He was stuck behind Stroll for far too long, especially then when you saw, I think, who was it behind? Gasly and Sainz and Ocon, I think it was, who got past Stroll instantly. So maybe a little bit of a learning curve there for Isaac. But still very, very strong result for RB. And that battle in the championship for P6 downwards, other than P10 with Alpine, very, very close. And that's going to be definitely something to watch right down to the wire. But yeah, also speaking of Alpine, they finally scored points with Pierre Gasly. A disappointing weekend for Franco Colapinto. Obviously, sort of his home race, his home South American race. So, yeah, disappointing for him. Yeah, I don't think there's much more to be said. It was just the first weekend we've seen in a while where he was really off the pace of Pierre. And ironically, it was the weekend where he got confirmed for next year. Actually, quickly on that, what did you make of that? Were you surprised at all by that? Or, I mean, it sort of seemed like that was going to be the announcement that was going to come out.
I was shocked though.
Okay.
I think in context of Jack Doohan, I don't think Colapinto's come and lit this Alpine alive, and I think it's unfair because, you can't really compare too much because this car is just a tractor. The fact that, Pierre's able to get points from it shows, how he is the better driver when it comes to, I guess, getting actual race results. Colapinto's has been quicker on race pace than his teammate Pierre Gasly, but that comes with DNFs and less consistency than Pierre, up and down. And I don't think he's done anything insane to basically keep his seat. That's there's going to be 22 drivers next year on the grid. That's a space for someone who is in F2. Alex Dunn. The drivers who are doing amazing in F2 this year, and I can't really see many spots on the grid for them. It's weird because we always have an influx of drivers from F2 and then we don't have any for another 3 years. And then we all have a big influx again. It's like the 2019 rookies. Then you add like the odd one, like with Oscar Piastri, Zhou Guanyu, Mick Schumacher. But then you add another big influx again this year. So I don't know. I like Franco Colapinto. I think he's a great driver and I'm glad it is him. I am. But I don't think he's done anything in particular where he deserves it, especially in the context of Jack doing. I think he's not done anything more than what Jack did. So it's a bit harsh on Jack, I would say, even though he's not raced all this season since Miami. So yeah, but I just think in the context of that, it's a bit like, oh, okay.
Yeah, it is. I guess from that perspective, especially with Jack, and I still defend Jack massively. I think that he was treated incredibly harshly. I think that he was showing good signs of pace, and I'm hoping that he gets picked up by Haas in a reserve role potentially. You never know. Could replace Ocon just like he did at Alpine. So I'm hoping he gets another shot because I do think that, and I said that quite a few times on here, that he was just like treated incredibly harshly, and it was almost a case of it just felt like, well, Franco's got sponsors and he's a bigger name, we'll get him in. But I do think that Franco, I would say, has done enough to merit that seat. I don't think, obviously, when you look at the points table, he's nowhere near Pierre, and he's not scored a single point, and he's the only driver on the grid apart from obviously Jack to do that this year. So yeah, it's disappointing from that point of view. But the car's been so poor that you can only really measure the inter-team battle, and he's made a step up. He has definitely in qualifying, and in, as you said, in race pace, he is consistently very quick. Obviously, this weekend was, I think, quite telling that ultimately, when it comes down to it, and when the actual points are potentially on the table, I think it's something I've said with Pierre as well, is that unless points are a potential, he just doesn't seem to care, and he just doesn't seem to put anything into it. Whereas when there's a sniff of points, and he said, I think it was in FP1, car feels different. Car feels alive this weekend. And he has that sniff, and he puts in the performance that gets the points. Whereas Colapinto just wasn't able to do that this weekend. So, yeah, but I do think that I just can't think who else would deserve a seat, other than maybe Paul Aaron, because Paul Aaron obviously was brilliant last year in F2. But I look at the F2 grid this year, and maybe other than Alex Dunn, and even Alex Dunn, I'm not 1,000,000% convinced by. I just don't think it's a very strong grid. Maybe Lindblad, obviously, in the Red Bull stable, but he's never going to be at Red Bull. Maybe Yuki Tsunoda could have been an outside shot. That could have been a cool one.
Ooh, Pierre and Yuki reunited.
Yeah.
I mean, when it comes to F2, when you're saying, like, there's Luke Brown in, but I just think, like, Alex Dunn has left his contract as a McLaren, like, June in the academy, McLaren academy driver. I just think, is there a reason for that? Has he got a seat with which is with another team? And obviously the grid's not full yet. Not everyone's signed the contract ready for next year, but I don't know. I actually can't think what seats are left, to be honest.
It's only Red Bull. Red Bull are the only team without confirming their, obviously, Yuki Tsunoda's seat, but then the two at RB actually aren't confirmed. So I think that's the only opportunity. Obviously, I think is expected that Lindblad would come in, but I don't think he will. I think that the step up that Liam Lawson's made recently, I think that obviously you can't get rid of Hajar and Tsunoda. It's a difficult one because I do still think, and I think generally everyone seems to think that if you put Sonoda in that RB, he is still gonna. He would be in the top 10 consistently.
He would
So
outbeat Liam Lawson, in my opinion.
yeah, I think,
He,
and if not, he'd be on the similar level, which is what Lawson is to Hadjar at the moment. I think those three drivers are all a very similar level. It feels
mhm.
like, and they would all be getting a very consistent level out of that RB. So it feels very harsh to drop any of them. And I think that
Yeah.
Lindblad hasn't quite proven enough in F2 this year to say that he's definitely mature enough to make that step up. So yeah, if I was Red Bull, I would maybe. I don't know because I mean Tsunoda's not really doing enough at Red Bull to maybe merit still keeping that Red Bull seat. But I don't think I wouldn't want to put Hadjar in there because I don't want to destroy his confidence. And Lawson, I don't think ever's going to go back to that Red Bull seat realistically. So it's
Mhm.
a difficult one for them. But
I just can't imagine an F1 world where Yuki Tsunoda isn't in it.
yeah,
Like,
no,
I'll come into the sport at the same time that Yuki came into sport, and like, that's Yuki.
no,
Like,
I
I
know
love Yuki.
that would be
It
devastating.
just
And
wouldn't be right.
I think he would find a seat somewhere, and like Alpine, I think would be a good spot for him if Franco doesn't step up to Pierre's level next year. When it comes to if they have a competitive car and Franco is not quite able to, to deliver the points when it matters, I think that Yuki would be someone they would probably look at and go, okay, he could probably do a better job for us than Franco. But I think it's harsh to say for Franco. I think he hasn't really had the opportunity. He hasn't had the car that actually delivers points apart from
Mhm.
what this one weekend. My camera battery's
Mhm.
died, so I think we're going to end pretty soon. But yeah, I just don't think he hasn't had the car to consistently say, oh, he doesn't deliver when the point scoring opportunities are there. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's a difficult one to judge, but yeah, I think if I had to guess, I think that Red Bull it will be as it is, and I think that Colapinto will do a decent job next year. But yeah, are there any other talking
So,
points? Oh, go on.
sorry, so you think Red Bull won't have Arvid Lindblad in the team then, going
Not
into the
next
next
year, no.
season?
No, I think that
Okay.
if he'd been a bit more, if he stood out a little bit more in F2, I think he's shown quite a lot of inconsistency and some pretty poor errors at times. Um,
Yeah.
can't remember what race it was, but there was one where he just it was incredibly poor and inexperienced, and I just think it was different
Do
with
you not?
Antonelli and Behrman last year because it was like well that Prima was so poor that
Yeah.
everyone and you'd already seen with Behrman that he'd had this time in F1 with obviously Ferrari and a few races with Haas that it was like well we know he's going to do a decent job and with Antonelli it was Kimi Antonelli. Arvid Lindblad is not quite Kimi Antonelli levels of hype, and I don't. I think 2026 is an important year to just get that baseline of where you are and have when it's a completely new set of regulations, you sort of want a little bit of experience, I'd say. And so I
Mhm.
think that just sticking with what they've got, which is proving to be okay, apart from that second Red Bull seat, but I think
Do
we
you
all
not
know
think
that's a
they
different issue.
promote Hadjar? Do you not think they
I don't
promote
know.
Hadjar though?
I don't know. It's
That's the.
difficult.
I think
Yeah,
that could happen.
and I almost kind of want that to happen for Yuki's sake.
Mhm.
But I also want Yuki to have that opportunity in a new set of regulations where maybe they develop a car that actually is not the most incredibly difficult to drive car of all time, and then he
And
can
just
actually
around for Stappen.
yeah, because if you think if Yuki was in any other top team, I think we'd be seeing some great results from him. Like I think if he was
Mhm.
in that Mercedes, or if he was in the McLaren, or if he was in the Ferrari even, I think Ferrari's a somewhat similar situation, not quite the same.
Yeah.
But if he was in any of those other top teams, I think we'd be seeing some brilliant results from him.
Mhm.
I think it is purely just that Red Bull because when you look at him in V Carb, he was brilliant. Like
Mhm.
there was a reason we were all clamoring for him to get that promotion over Liam Lawson was because he was so good for RB. So yeah, I don't know. I I don't know what I'd do if I was Red Bull because I don't want to ruin Yuki's career, but they also need results. So I don't know.
Mhm.
What would you do? What would you do?
What with the RB situation?
Yeah.
I'd promote Isaac Hadjar. But then I don't want to like give the lambs to the slaughter. Like, do you know what I mean?
Mm.
Like, I don't want him to be in the position Yuki and Liam have been in. Um, I'd like to put Yuki back in the RB. However, my logic when I've said it about Liam Lawson, why would you promote him and then demote him? Why would you, put a 30-odd-year-old Daniel Ricciardo in there and then demote him? And, Yuki's not a young driver anymore. He's a very experienced driver. He's clearly not cut it at Red Bull for face value. Obviously, I don't think the car is fair in the slightest. But he hasn't performed well at top team. We've seen what Red Bull have done with them sort of drivers that have experienced that before when it's come to Alex Albon, Pierre Gasly. They've just been cut. And I don't understand why Yuki wouldn't be. What's changed their tune so much? I think my ideal Red Bull lineup going into next season now would be Max, Isaac Hadjar,
Oh.
and then in RB would be Yuki Tsunoda and Ovid Lindblad. I really have had Liam has really grown on me this season, and I've really enjoyed watching the races, especially this race was insane from him, and obviously having Hadjar under pressure for that last lap almost got took out. Liam has grown on me, but I just think why not give another new young driver another chance? And I rate Yuki over Liam slightly.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Do you
that's what I would
do you know what I would love to see? And I think that the Red Bull aren't going to do this because they've gone down this thing of, oh well, Yuki gets the rest of the season. But for these final 3 races, just give them one each. And if you could guarantee them a seat in F1 next year, but say we're just going to see which of you adapt to the Red Bull best, and that it's not going to be, anything that's going to damage your career, or we're not going to be like, oh, if you do terrible in that Red Bull, we're going to sack you off. And just say, and it doesn't harm your chances of getting a promotion potentially in the future when maybe we've sorted out the issue, but just so we can have the best possible driver for next year. For these final 3 races, we're going to put Yuki in the first race, Isaac in the second race, and Liam in the last race, just to get some sort of an idea of whether they're the problem or the car's the problem. Because if Hadjar comes in and is useless, I don't know what Red Bull do, because then it's just like, well,
I don't hate it.
we've just got we just have to write off that second seat. So I don't know. It's such a weird situation.
I think if it weren't so close for P2 and the constructors,
yeah,
I think probably that would be a great idea. But I think Red Bull have to go in with some sort of consistency. But I love that idea. But yeah, that's another massive talking point I'm sure we'll go into going into Las Vegas. But that P2, it's just a lot of money. Who cares about P2? But it isn't when it comes to F1. Is Mercedes could have a lot more money going into that the new regulations era. I think that would be massive if Mercedes did. I think they probably, if I had to put my bets, I'd go Mercedes.
Yeah, no, I think this weekend was massive for Mercedes in that P2. Obviously, with Ferrari double DNF, and obviously Mercedes picking up some really good points, P2, P4, and Red Bull only having one horse in the race basically, and still being some way off Mercedes, and getting outscored by Mercedes this weekend. Yeah, I think that Mercedes, I know obviously they were great in Las Vegas last year. They like the colder conditions. I could see them having a brilliant weekend in Las Vegas as well. So I think it's theirs to lose. So yeah, but I think that is going to wrap it up, considering that I am just a black screen and have been for the last 5 minutes. But yeah, thank you for watching if you have watched. And yeah, we will see you hopefully later this week potentially for... When is Las Vegas? Is it this weekend?
2 weeks. Okay. It's the 22nd, yeah.
Well, we might see you later this week for a different video. If not, we will see you next week for our Las Vegas predictions. So, thank you for joining me once again, Amy. And yeah, we will see you all soon.